Living things are sometimes called organisms. All of these are examples of living things, and you can see from what we talked about earlier, you see some prokaryotic organisms, those pink rod-shaped bacteria, and you also see some eukaryotic organisms, all the other things on the page. You see fungi, animals, plants. And the only thing we're missing here are protists. So, living things, no matter what kind they are, have 4 characteristics that are always going to be true. And in fact, there's more than 4, but we're going to talk about 4 today. Number 1, all living things have to be able to reproduce on their own. So they have to be able to reproduce without the help of another living thing. For example, bacteria are able to divide and reproduce. Viruses are not living because in order to reproduce, they have to have the cell of another organism to use to reproduce. All living things have basic needs. They may need an environment with water. They may need certain kinds of food. They may need a certain amount of sunlight, but they have basic needs. All living things grow and develop. They get bigger and they change. And all living things move and respond to the environment. This may not be moving like you do when you walk across the floor, but if you've ever noticed a plant sitting in a window, the leaves after a few days tend to turn to face the sun. So they're responding and moving to their environment. So what is an ecosystem? Ecosystems are all of the living and non-living things in an environment interacting with each other. So we have a special word in science for living, and that's biotic. Bio means living, and abiotic means non-living. The letter A in front of a word simply means not. So this abiotic would mean not living. So let's look first about abiotic or non-living things. They do not grow. They do not need food. They do not reproduce on their own. Some examples of abiotic factors in an ecosystem would be the amount of sunlight, the amount of water the ecosystem has, the air, the minerals, the temperature, and I've added the soil, and all the nutrients in the soil would also be an abiotic factor. So actually it's, 6, not 5. All right, so biotic things, therefore, do grow and develop. They do reproduce. They do produce waste products as they live. They die in the end. Some examples of biotic factors in an ecosystem would be all plants, animals, fungi, protists, and bacteria. Okay, so let's watch a quick little video before we move on.
Abiotic and biotic factors. An ecosystem contains living and non-living things. The ecosystem has many examples of the interaction between the living and the non-living. Living things in an ecosystem are called biotic factors. Living things include plants, animals, bacteria, fungi, and more. The non-living parts of the ecosystem are called abiotic factors. Some non-living things are sun, temperature, water, atmospheric gases, and soil. One example of the interaction between abiotic and biotic factors is with plants. Plants use sunlight, water, and CO2 to make food. Without these things, plants would not be able to grow. Another example is the interaction between turtles and soil. Some turtles are known to bury themselves in the soil. When the temperature becomes too hot, turtles seek protection in the cool underground. Elephants and water interact as well. In order to stay hydrated, elephants drink water. In fact, all biotic factors need water to survive. Fish and temperature also show the interaction between the living and the non-living. A fish's body temperature matches its surroundings. Warm, tropical waters keep the fish's body operating at an optimal temperature. Another example is fox in the snow. When the temperature drops and the snow starts to fall, some foxes grow a white fur coat. The thick coat insulates and keeps the fox warm. Also, the color matches its surroundings, an adaptation known as camouflage. Lastly, bacteria and soil interact. Bacteria are decomposers. Decomposers get energy by recycling dead organisms back into the ground. Nutrients re-enter the soil, making the ground fertile. So take a look out your window and try and identify the interactions between abiotic and biotic factors. Abiotic and biotic factors. Abiotic and biotic factors. An ecosystem
All right, so just a really quick, important piece. Organisms interact with both the living and the non-living things in their ecosystem. So a human requires other living things and non-living things to survive. Some of the biotic things that maybe a human would need would be all the different kinds of foods we eat, both plant and animals. Some of the abiotic things we need to survive would be water, oxygen. Okay. So all the things in an organism can be organized from smallest to largest. We call this the hierarchy of biological organization. A single species would be the smallest group, and this could be just one or two individuals. But if you have a whole group of the same species, then we have what we call a population. So all the same kind of animal living in the same place. In Oxford, we have a population of humans. There's a number outside of town that tells the approximate population, just the people in Oxford. Then if you take all of the different populations, so let's say in Oxford, the people, the cats, the dogs, the birds, the earthworms, the mosquitoes, the trees, all those different living things that make up their own populations. If we put all those living things together, we have a community. And then if we add in the abiotic or non-living parts like the water and the temperature, the amount of oxygen, the amount of humidity, the amount of sunlight, then we have an ecosystem. And then lastly, if we take all of the ecosystems that have similar characteristics and we put them together, then we have what we call a biome. So here's an image demonstrating that same thing. First picture is a single organism of one species. In the next group, you have multiple population or a single population of that species, multiple individuals. In the community picture, you have lots of different kinds of living things that all make up different populations, but together are a community. And in the ecosystem image, you're adding in the sunlight and the clouds and the water as well. So just to give a little bit more about each of those levels in the hierarchy. So a species is a group of organisms with similar characteristics that can interbreed. This means, yeah, they look similar, but they can also reproduce and have babies that can also go on and reproduce. So all the zebras on Earth would be part of that zebra species. All the giraffes would be part of the giraffe species, and all the houseflies would be part of that species. If we put a group of those individual species into an area that they're living in the same place at the same time, then we have a population. These are groups of interacting organisms. So they're not organisms that are in completely different areas and will never, ever, ever see each other. So a certain area of grassland, those grasses that are in that area would be a population. A herd of elephants that lives together, or a pack of wolves. These would be examples of populations. And a community would be all the interacting populations. So the zebras that live with the wildebeest, that live with the elephants, these are all part of a community because they live together. And the plants would be part of that community as well. So, for example, this picture of an African savanna would be a community. And if we added in the non-living parts, such as the water and the temperature and the sunlight, then we would have an ecosystem. So an ecosystem is all the biotic and abiotic parts that interact in an environment. The Amazon rainforest would be an example of an ecosystem. The African savanna would be a part of an ecosystem. The Sahara Desert would be an ecosystem. Then, if we take all the areas that have similar ecosystems and put them together, those would be part of a biome. So, in green on this map, I have shown all of the savanna biomes or ecosystems. So, it would make up the savanna biome. This includes the African savanna, but it also includes some other areas that are also savanna as well. Okay, so this just shows some of the different areas on Earth that have some of those different biomes. So if you want to pause and just kind of look at the map a little bit closer, you could. So just a couple seconds spent on what are some examples of abiotic or non-living factors that are important in an ecosystem. So sunlight is extremely important. 5th grade, you learned that sunlight is where plants get their energy from so they can do photosynthesis. And photosynthesis makes the food for every other organism on Earth. So it also provides the heat that makes life possible on Earth. Air is needed by almost all organisms on Earth. That oxygen, that is part of our abiotic factors on Earth. Water is something that living things depend on. Temperature. You saw in the little video clip that certain animals survive better in certain temperatures. Soil with the types of nutrients or minerals are going to affect how plants grow, and that would be an abiotic factor as well. All right, so I hope that helped a little bit with the differences between biotic and abiotic factors and what exactly a living thing is in the first place.